Just a correction, the talk is actually on circadian rhythm and beta cell function, because I've been doing circadian rhythm many times. I've just narrowed it down a little. I have no conflicts of interest. Many of you have heard me talk over the years, have seen this slide. I haven't changed this slide in almost 15 years from the time I started talking about inflammation and diabetes. I've been continuing to do this. There is I don't know how many of you belong to this generation, but if you follow this generation, they use a fantastic term, it's called FAFO. F is a 4-letter word, and the last 2 words are find out, right? And exactly what we have done with our lives. We have FAFO, right? Because we have more food, more frequent food, change in the quality of food, processed food, more light, less sleep, disturbed sleep, change in the circadian rhythm, less physical work, more sedentary time, more screen time, greater stress, no downtime. All of this in the last 100 years. And no wonder nature has revolted and given us chronic disease. I think that the reason I'm going to quote something, because I heard Dr. Mohan say this, and very aptly, simply he reminded that there was once, I think he was talking to Sri Sathya Sai Baba, and he was saying we really don't know what genetics or environment that is causing the diabetes, and Sri Sai Baba reminded him, did you have diabetes 30 years ago? Pointing to the fact that it is a environmental effect, right? So this is what we have done to our environment, and that's why the environment has done this to us. My interest in this is a few years ago. Our first article looking at the sleep disturbance and diabetes, and since then I've been on this for a while. This is the risk of obesity and rotating night shift, right? And we'll come to this in a moment. I'm not going to spend time on this. I've done circadian rhythm in many, many forums. What I will do is to sort of go into a little depth into the beta cell and show you that the beta cell is controlled by the clock genes. And the appearance of diabetes is a natural outcome of, so far we've been talking about the effect of circadian rhythm on insulin resistance and all the others. But nowhere have we really tied it to the beta cell. So let me show you some data and some interesting stuff on how we can actually work on this. This is again, just to set the context that rotating night shift and increase the risk of obesity and diabetes. But let me take you back to many, many years. This is Ken Polanski's data, which first showed that diabetes is a loss of rhythm. The first thing to be lost in diabetes is the rhythmicity by which glucose and insulin work together. And remember, when you put let's take an alpha and a beta cell and you put a mirror in front of it, the alpha cell mirrors the beta cell. And it is this rhythmicity that is first lost in diabetes, as Ken Polanski showed it many, many years ago, right? And these are all the things that happens. I've talked about it before. There's an altered dark life cycle. We sleep later. We are not exposed to darkness. Darkness is as important as light. We'll talk about it. Then, of course, we can have genetic conditions, but this is something all of you have heard before. Before I move on, I also want you to know that the evidence base we have for this is sort of variable. So don't take everything I say with sweet and jaggery. Take it with enough pinch of salt. This we have strong evidence, right? That circadian disruption does cause diabetes. We have limited evidence about circadian expression and metabolic pathologies. We have emerging evidence about biomarkers, about its role of BMAL1 in the beta cell. So clearly, some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about are emerging evidences that will become stronger or may get lost over a period of time. But I think it's interesting to be aware of it. As usual, let me also tell you about how our ancestors were actually smarter than all of us. This is the Aruna Prashna. Sarvaswad bhuvanadhi tasyaha paka visheshanaha smrtam kala visheshana. When I first read it, it's very interesting because you usually associate light with the passage of time. But if you read this carefully, it tells you that it is the heat of the rays of the sun that help you understand light, passage of time. We thought, maybe they just said it. But in 2019, I was reading an article that showed that thermic sensors in the skin actually project to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So our ancestors actually knew far more than we think they did. With that, let me move on. And of course, yesterday was Arudra. If you remember, and today we are celebrating Rajendra the First. Yesterday was Punarvasu, Rajendra's coronation. We are in Rajendra Hall. This is the Chola week. And the Cholas were the first to see the Orion constellation as Shiva's dance. This is Betelgeuse, on top is Arudra. And there was a supernova 1,000 years ago, which many of you who would have read Ponniyin Selvan will remember that that's counted. But the Chola bronzes are the great hunter. And the Orion constellation is not just a timekeeper for India, for the whole world. The great hunter is a timekeeper. And that is why Ujjain was GMT 0. It was the zero meridian, and that's why you have Mahakal there. So there is a time connection that is cosmic. So let's see if that works out in ourselves. Now, biological rhythms are controlled this way, that there is a stimulus called Zeitgebers, then there are sensory preceptors, there is a clock that is both in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but as I will show you, in every cell, and these clocks determine locomotor patterns, feeding behaviors, hormones. How many of you feel hungry at the same time every day, irrespective of whether food is available or not? Just a small amount. All the others have lost their circadian rhythm. But remember that this is clock related, that even ghrelin secretion is clock related. Won't go too much into it. But remember, the most important thing is to remember that food, time, and light are the most primordial of conserved pathways. In plants, food is glucose because photosynthesis depends on light. In nocturnal animals, it's reversed. But generally, the cycle that we have is basically during daytime, it is geared to metabolism of food and glucose in plenty. Night is mitophagy, autophagy. Why you need to sleep, why you need darkness is because that also means that the fuels are partitioned. The enzymes are partitioned. If you run a factory for 24 hours, when there is no raw material, what happens? You lose efficiency. You waste money. Your factory has to shut down. Similarly, the body is very, very efficient. Remember, our bodies were not built for plenty, they were built for scarcity. Therefore, they are exceptionally efficient. The only inefficient cells in our body are the beta cell and the heart. The heart is not meant to be efficient, it's meant to consume energy. The beta cell is not meant to be efficient, it is meant to produce insulin at the right time. And that is why they are also the most vulnerable of cells that we have. So remember this and go on. So every cell has a clock. I'm not anymore talking about the central clock. I'm talking about the clock that's there in every cell. This is the clock gene. It's called the BMAL1, and it is a redundant dual pathway by which it reinforces itself. It sits on most protein synthesis that is rhythmic and controls it. And I'm going to show you data that it actually controls insulin secretion. That it is time bound, it is controlled by gut, it is controlled by the sensations we have, it is controlled by the central clock. The BMAL1 gives an output to not just the other proteins, but it also sits on many cells as a promoter, many genetic things as a promoter or a disruptor. Okay, so this, all of you know, this is central energy expenditure. You also know, and in every obesity conference, you've talked about it, that there are behavioral and hormonal signals that control eating. But remember, I said I'm going to talk about beta cells, I'm going to move on. The clock controls many things inside the cell. One, it controls itself. The second thing it controls is metabolism. It works at nuclear receptors, at co-activators and co-repressors. Third, and very importantly, it works at the cell cycle. It senses time and activates or deactivates the cell cycle, especially by working through p53 and F-box proteins. It controls, it does epigenetic remodeling, and that's one of the reasons that sometimes our habits are inherited. Don't want to get into it, but just remember, I talked to you about that night and day are separated. So if you are a daytime person, muscle fatty acid, glycolysis, lipogenesis, adiponectin increases during the day. The liver, all of these occurs. In the night, it changes. So these are circadian. Remember, we talk about circadian, but there are other rhythms that control us. For example, circulunar rhythms. For example, the menstrual cycle is controlled by circulunar rhythms. There are circannual rhythms. There are even the Fibonacci sequence kind of rhythms that work in birds. So we are only aware of one rhythm, but remember there are multiple rhythms. So for example, in metabolism, clocks control gluconeogenesis, especially Cry1. You remember HNF4 alpha, the Modi gene? Controls gluconeogenesis. PER2 controls PPAR gamma, therefore controls adipocyte differentiation. Cry1 controls glucocorticoid receptors and inflammation. So the clock is not just as something sitting on top. It's inbuilt into the genetic machinery of every cell. Right? Also, here is it at a micro. I said that the circadian rhythm, the metabolism itself is circadian. So can you see what is happening? This is the rest phase. Here, can you see this cry? Works with the glucocorticoid receptors, works with gluconeogenesis, and creates lactate and amino acids when you're not, when you're fasting. On the other hand, here, the clock on the BMAL work with glycogen synthesis, glucose is available, increases insulin receptor sensitivity, all the others. So clearly remember that just like your eating and sleeping are meant to be circadian, the body is built to have a circadian metabolism. Otherwise, it will burn out. And this burnout is what diabetes is all about. Also, now we know that the mitochondria, which is the seat where our energy is mitochondria. Remember, there are two things that are maternally inherited. One is the mitochondria. That's why energy is Shakti. The second is our gut microbiota. Both are maternally inherited. The mitochondria is also circadian. So there are certain features. Let me show you the next one, it will give you an idea. This is the light phase, the dark phase. And can you see the citric acid cycle enzymes are all upregulated during the light phase. Those enzymes that control energy metabolism are upregulated at the right phase, which means that if you eat at the wrong time, those enzymes are not available. Therefore, there's a greater demand on these. So you eat at the wrong times, you do things at the wrong times, you are naturally getting an inefficient output, reactive oxidative species, apoptosis, that's it. So remember, this is the number of percentage of mitochondrial enzymes that are circadian. Not only that, the gut microbiota are also rhythmic. So their activities, remember your gut, you think you own the body. The gut microbiota, which is much more in number than you, they actually own the body. They are the ones that are regulating your metabolism, your fat distribution, and they are through three mechanisms, the GLPs, that is the incretin receptors, through HDAC, which is epigenetic modification, and lastly by inflammation, TLR receptors. They control fat distribution, they control your liver, and they control metabolism. Let me show you this. For example, if I take the liver and I either remove microbiome or I remove the clock gene, see what happens. The liver metabolism changes when I remove both, and it comes down when I either remove gut microbiomes or I remove the clock gene. So the clock gene and the microbiome are together responsible for liver transcriptomics. Let me take it forward. I have 4 minutes to go. Now, this, I won't get into this. This is a study that we did. This is how I started in this. We actually put rats through a nurse's shift. And what we realized was that when you put them, originally I was trying to look at FOXO. I didn't look at BMAL1. We showed this is a normal circadian rhythm. This is just reversal. This is a nurse's shift. See what happens. When it is reversed itself, it behaves like obesity. The pancreas expands, the beta cells expand. On the other hand, when you go through a nurse's shift, constantly changing, the pancreas actually underwent necrosis at the end of 3 months. So you go on a nurse's shift, you're destroying your pancreas. I won't get to the data. So what happens to the circadian clock when you reverse your cycle? What happens is the insulin tries to go reverse, but it is inefficient. Why it's inefficient? Because the clock genes are not there. So in somebody who's prone to diabetes, when you reverse the cycle, there is beta cell apoptosis. Therefore, they move on to diabetes much faster. That explains why some of them don't, many of them do, simply because they have greater sensitivity. So just to tell you that the beta cell is also circadian, I'll come to this part. On the other hand, let's take a beta cell and let's sort of remove BMAL. When you remove BMAL, the ability to respond to glucose comes down. BMAL is the most important one when it comes to glucose secretion. Similarly, the insulin response, the glucose-stimulated insulin response comes down, which means glucose-stimulated insulin response is dependent on BMAL1, which is the most important clock gene. And interestingly, this works at the mitochondria of the beta cell, right? So what really happens is the BMAL not only controls insulin secretion, it also controls the ability of the beta cell to respond to inflammation. When BMAL is present, the beta cell recovers. When BMAL is absent, the beta cell is not able to recover to inflammatory injury, which means your circadian rhythm is one of the most important ways to respond to inflammatory injury. Just to summarize it, that BMAL, what it does is it inhibits ATP, UCP2, which inhibits ATP, which inhibits USIS. So which means glucose-stimulated insulin secretion is facilitated by BMAL1. If it is not there, when UCP2 is overexpressed, you get reactive activation species. And that is one of the reasons why you get beta cell dysfunction, reactive oxidation species. And now, if you upregulate BMAL1, you can regulate beta cell function. In the last 1.5 minutes, let me talk quickly about what can you do. So I just told you that in the presence of BMAL1, remember that insulin is, these cells don't die, they reverse back to something where it's not producing insulin, because insulin production is very energy intensive. I won't go into this, but there are a whole bunch of things that stabilize the clock. One could be metformin, but let me talk about two things. One is, I talked about this morning about thiazolidinediones. TZDs seem to have a remarkable effect in stabilizing the BMAL1. So one of the reasons to resurrect thiazolidinediones. But an interesting drug that may be available in the future is upregulating BMAL1 in patients who have shift workers, and that's a drug called nobiletin. Nobiletin, when given in BMAL1 knocked out mice, is able to restore glucose-stimulated insulin secretion. So in future, this may be a way of restoring beta cell function in patients who are on shift workers. At this point of time, no data. So to summarize, I have 19 seconds. We march to biological rhythms. Second, metabolic disease is because we disrupt these rhythms. Metabolic diseases disrupt biological rhythms. Restoration of biological rhythms, we restore homeostasis. The best way to get rid of diabetes is to have darkness in your room, eat before you're supposed to finish food, and sleep nicely at night. I'll close with this. The source of all movements, Shiva's dance, gives rhythms to the universe. He dances in evil places, in sacred. He creates and preserves, destroys and releases. We are part of this dance. We are part of this eternal rhythm. And woe to us if, blinded by illusions, we detach ourselves from the dance of the cosmos, this universal harmony. So keep your rhythm. Thank you so much.